The first time Karen screamed, "This is a criminal offense." It wasn't even noon yet, and the only crime being committed was the terrible aim of my 7-year-old, who had just beamed his own sister with a half-filled water balloon. The splash echoed across the cul-de-sac, followed by giggles, followed by the sound of Karen's storm door slamming as she burst onto her porch like an extra in a courtroom drama. She was in her usual summer uniform, wide-brimmed sun hat, pastel capris, and a polo shirt so starched it could have stood up on its own. She pointed one trembling finger at the yard where a dozen neighborhood kids were laughing and chasing each other with balloons, hoses, and dollar store squirt guns. "You cannot allow this kind of chaos," she shouted, her voice already teetering on the edge of hysteria. "This is private property governed by rules, and I will not tolerate biological hazards being hurled around like grenades." My daughter paused mid-throw, balloon poised in her hand, and looked at me with wide eyes as if to ask whether our neighbor had actually just compared tap water to anthrax. I waved her on. She launched it with a mischievous grin, and it burst harmlessly against the driveway. That was enough for Karen. She snatched her phone from her pocket, dramatically announced, "That's it. I'm calling 911, and dialed right there in front of us as if the mere act of punching in the numbers made her the deputy sheriff of the block. Now, normally, a rational person would assume dispatch had bigger emergencies to juggle than fourth graders with balloons. But this was our HOA Karen, a woman who once held up traffic for 20 minutes to measure the length of a neighbor's grass with a tape measure. She relished escalation. I watched her pacing on the curb, shrill voice carrying as she gave dispatch her version of events. Children. Assault weapons. Neighborhood safety. Yes, I am the president of the Homeowners Association. She made sure to sprinkle that last part in like it gave her federal authority. While she ranted, I surveyed the scene. Lawn chairs lined the driveways. Parents lounged with sodas. The ice chest was half empty. The air smelled of sunscreen and barbecue smoke. To anyone with functioning eyes, it was a simple summer block gathering. Yet here was Karen, escalating it into a neighborhood crime saga. I could almost predict her next step, demanding sirens, SWAT gear, maybe even helicopter backup. But fate, or karma, was already arranging a more poetic twist. See, the so-called ringleader of this dangerous balloon mob wasn't even one of the kids. It was my friend Marcus, who happened to be crouching behind my hedge, refilling balloons from a garden hose and barking playful, tactical orders at the kids like he was directing a military exercise. Marcus, with his wide grin and quick wit, who looked like an oversized kid himself. Marcus, who just so happened to be the actual chief of police for our town. Karen didn't know that, of course. To her, Marcus was just a tall guy in board shorts egging the children on. She shrieked when she spotted him, yelling across the lawn, "You, sir! You are enabling minors in acts of public indecency. You will be held accountable." He stood, dripping balloon in hand, raised his brows and said calmly, "Public indecency? For water fights? That's a new one." She turned away from him, phone still pressed to her ear, and announced loud enough for all of us to hear, "Yes, officer, please hurry. There is an adult male on scene encouraging violent activity. He's intimidating me." "I couldn't help it," I laughed. It slipped out sharp and sudden, and Karen whipped her head toward me with daggers in her eyes. But she couldn't keep her glare long enough. A balloon smacked the pavement at her feet, bursting in a cool splash that dotted her sandals. She shrieked like someone had dumped acid on her. The kids froze. Even Marcus winced. For a split second, the whole cul-de-sac was silent except for Karen's heavy breathing. Then she screeched, "That's assault. That's assault on an HOA officer. They'll all be charged." The irony was rich. She had no idea that the man she was trying to sick the cops on was, quite literally, their boss. I leaned back in my lawn chair, cracked open another soda, and thought, this was about to get very entertaining. Karen's voice carried through the neighborhood like a siren before the sirens even arrived. She was pacing back and forth at the edge of my lawn, phone pressed tight to her ear, snapping exaggerated updates into the receiver like she was narrating a hostage crisis. Yes, the man is still here. No, he's not complying. He's orchestrating the entire attack. There are dozens of children. Yes, dozens. They're armed. With balloons. Some filled with questionable liquid. She paused for effect, then added in a dramatic whisper, I suspect urine. That one nearly made me choke on my soda. Half the parents sitting nearby coughed to hide their laughter. Even the kids, though confused, exchanged looks that suggested they understood Karen was wildly overselling the danger. The only one who didn't find it funny was Karen herself, who kept swiveling her head like a meerkat, checking to see who dared laugh at her performance. Across the driveway, Marcus, the chief of police, though Karen was still blissfully unaware, was calmly supervising a group of kids at the hose, demonstrating how to knot the balloons without breaking them. He looked up, noticed Karen's glare, and gave her a polite wave. That made her stumble mid-sentence. Yes, dispatch? He's taunting me now. Waving at me. Very threatening. I leaned back in my chair, eyes half-shielded behind sunglasses, and thought about how Karen's greatest weapon wasn't her HOA title or even her phone. It was her ability to believe her own exaggerations. She didn't see water balloons. She saw a siege. She didn't see Marcus smiling. She saw a criminal mastermind mocking her authority. And when she saw me smirking into my soda, she marched over like a woman who'd already written my guilty verdict in her head. You, she hissed, pointing at me as though I were the one in handcuffs. You are complicit. This is your driveway, your hose, your yard. You'll be held responsible when the officers arrive. I gave her a slow shrug. Guess we'll find out. Her nostrils flared. Don't be smug. This is a federal matter. Water balloons are federal now? Yes, she barked, then hesitated just long enough to reveal even she wasn't sure where that leap had come from. She covered it by snapping, You'll see when the charges are filed. Reckless endangerment. Property damage. Psychological harm. Behind her, one of the kids lobbed a balloon that splashed harmlessly against my driveway. Karen spun around, shrieking again, and the child dropped the leftover balloons like contraband. Marcus stepped in smoothly, telling the kids to take a break. His voice carried that effortless authority people listen to without even realizing why. But Karen didn't notice. She was too focused on the distant wail of a siren approaching. The tension in the air shifted. Parents shifted in their lawn chairs. Kids looked uncertain now. No one wanted the fun to turn into an actual police incident. I could feel the unspoken question in the air. How far was Karen willing to take this? She answered by planting herself squarely in the middle of the road, arms crossed, face lit with triumphant satisfaction. Finally, she muttered. Justice. The cruiser rounded the corner, lights flashing, siren cutting out as it slowed in front of my driveway. The kids froze. The parents sat up straighter. And Karen straightened to her full height, every inch the self-proclaimed enforcer of order. 2 officers stepped out. Both young, both clearly expecting something routine. One of them glanced at the lawn, at the pile of colorful balloons scattered around, at the kids dripping with hose water, then back at Karen. His brow furrowed. Ma'am, was this the emergency? Karen strode toward them with the righteous fury of a martyr. Yes. You're looking at it. Weapons of assault, children being endangered, and that man, she pointed dramatically at Marcus, leading the charge. I demand immediate arrests. The younger officer blinked. Arrests for water balloons? Yes. Karen shrieked, voice cracking. This is a quiet community. A respectable community. You cannot let this barbarism continue. Do you know how much damage water does to stucco? To brick? To property values? While she rattled off her case, Marcus finally stepped forward. He still hadn't revealed his role, still letting her spool out her delusion in all its theatrical glory. He stood calmly with his arms crossed, a half-smile playing at his lips. The officer's eyes flicked to him, then back to Karen, then to me. I could tell they were piecing it together slowly. This wasn't about crime. This was about Karen. "Ma'am," the officer said gently, "with all due respect, this doesn't sound like a criminal matter. It sounds like kids playing on private property." Karen's face went crimson. She jabbed her finger toward Marcus again. "Then arrest him for trespassing. He is not even a resident here." Marcus tilted his head. "That's true. I don't live here." Her eyes gleamed with triumph. "Aha! You admit it." He added, with deliberate slowness, "But I do work here. Or, more accurately, these officers technically work for me." Silence fell like a thunderclap. The officers straightened instantly. One stammered, "Chief." Karen's head whipped between Marcus and the officers like a spectator who just realized the play was a tragedy, and she was the punchline. "Chief?" she repeated, her voice shrill with disbelief. Marcus finally pulled out his badge from the waterproof case he'd been carrying, standard habit for him even when off duty. He held it up, letting the sunlight glint off the emblem. "Marcus Hayes, Chief of Police. And today, I'm just here as a neighbor enjoying a balloon fight." The parents burst out laughing. Even the kids giggled nervously, sensing the shift. Karen, however, stood frozen in place, mouth slightly open, face a violent shade of red. She looked like she'd just swallowed a lemon whole. One of the officers cleared his throat, trying not to smile. Chief, you want us to handle this?" Marcus shook his head. "Nope. I think the situation's under control." He turned his gaze to Karen, calm but firm. "Ma'am, calling 911 for frivolous reasons is actually misuse of emergency services. I could write you up for it." Karen sputtered. "Frivolous? This was endangerment. Look at me, I was assaulted." She gestured at the tiny wet patch on her sandal from the balloon that had splashed near her. Marcus raised a brow. "That's not assault. That's summer fun. You need to calm down." I leaned forward in my chair, savoring every second. "Karen, maybe next time you can join us. You'd look great with a water gun." Her eyes snapped to me, blazing. "This is not over," she hissed. She spun on her heel and stormed back toward her house, muttering about lawsuits, board meetings, and property damage assessment. The cruiser pulled away. The officers shook their heads, barely concealing their smirks. Marcus returned to the hose, grinning. The kids, emboldened again, resumed their balloon skirmish. But I knew better than to think it was finished. Karen had been humiliated, and humiliation wasn't something she tolerated. She would be back. And next time, it wouldn't be just about water balloons. It would be about pride, control, and her unshakable need to win. And that, I thought as I sipped my soda, was going to make this summer very interesting. I woke up the next morning to find a folded piece of paper taped to my front door. The tape job was sloppy, rushed, as if the messenger had been in a hurry to escape. The words were typed in bold, all caps, on HOA letterhead: "Notice of community violation, reckless endangerment and unauthorized gathering." At the bottom, in Karen's jagged signature, she had added by hand, "Expect a hearing." I stood on my porch, coffee mug warming my hand, staring at the page. It wasn't the first time she'd slipped a notice under my nose, but the escalation was obvious. She had been humiliated yesterday in front of the entire block, especially in front of Marcus, and this letter wasn't about enforcing rules, it was about reclaiming authority. She wanted the neighborhood to forget that she had called 911 on children and ended up scolded by the chief of police. Her answer was bureaucracy. Paper, signatures, fines. The weapons of an HOA Karen. When I walked back inside, my kids were already plotting another balloon war. They wanted revenge in the form only children understand. Bigger balloons, more colors, maybe even water balloons frozen into ice bombs. I shook my head. Not today. Let's keep the war chest full until we see what she's planning. By mid-morning, the first whispers began. Parents stopping by, neighbors strolling past, a steady flow of information. Karen had summoned the HOA board to an emergency session that evening. Her agenda, apparently, included addressing threats to community safety and reviewing potential fines for residents who harbored disruptive activities. Which was HOA speak for, she was coming after me. I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was how quickly she managed to drum up support. Some neighbors, eager to stay on her good side, nodded along when she pitched her case door to door. Others were simply tired of the drama and thought siding with her would quiet things down. A few were genuine believers in HOA order, convinced that balloons and hoses were a slippery slope toward chaos. By the time the meeting rolled around, Karen had stacked the room with just enough allies to make it interesting. The HOA met in the community clubhouse, a beige, boxy building that smelled faintly of cleaning products and coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Folding chairs had been arranged in a stiff semicircle. At the front, a folding table bore pitchers of lukewarm water, a stack of papers, and Karen herself, seated like a judge in robes only she could see. She wore a navy blazer, pearls at her throat, and the kind of smile that said she already knew the verdict. Neighbors trickled in, filling the chairs. Some carried that uneasy look of people who wanted to be anywhere else. Others looked openly curious, as if they'd paid for a ticket to tonight's show. My family sat quietly near the back, my wife giving me the look that meant, don't provoke unless necessary. Karen banged a plastic gavel on the table. The sound was ridiculous, like a toy hammer, but she wielded it with all the solemnity of a courtroom. This emergency session of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association is now in order, she declared. The matter at hand: reckless endangerment, property damage, and threats to community order resulting from unauthorized activities conducted at the residence of Mr. Parker. Dozens of eyes turned to me. I sipped my water and waited. Karen continued, shuffling her papers with exaggerated purpose. Yesterday, residents were subjected to a scene of chaos: unsupervised minors running wild, adults encouraging dangerous behavior, and physical assaults using water-filled projectiles. A call to emergency services was required, diverting valuable resources. Today, we must decide what consequences are appropriate. Murmurs rippled through the room. A few heads nodded. A few rolled their eyes. I raised my hand. Point of order. Karen's lips twitched. This is not a court of law. Points of order are not recognized. Then let's call it a reality check, I said evenly. The dangerous projectiles were water balloons. The chaos was kids laughing. The adult you accused of orchestrating the event? The chief of police. That last part landed like a stone dropped into a still pond. People shifted uncomfortably. Karen's jaw tightened. The title of that man has no bearing on the fact that he was out of jurisdiction. He was acting as a private citizen, and he endangered this community. From the back, Marcus himself spoke up. He hadn't come in uniform, just a polo and slacks, but his presence alone made the room sit straighter. I was present, yes, he said calmly. And I can tell you there was no crime, no danger, no violation. The only misuse of resources was the 911 call. Karen's face flushed crimson. You are biased. I'm also the chief of police, Marcus said. When you summon officers under false pretenses, that's not bias. That's waste. The room stirred again. Some people smirked, others looked nervous. Karen saw her control slipping and slammed the plastic gavel down. Regardless, this board has authority to levy fines for conduct detrimental to the community. I propose a fine of $500 for reckless endangerment, plus an additional $100 poor child present. Gasps filled the room. Parents muttered angrily. Even her allies looked uneasy at the steepness of the penalty. Karen, sensing resistance, leaned forward with icy conviction. This is about principle. If we allow anarchy, property values plummet. If children believe rules don't matter, respect collapses. This is bigger than balloons. This is about order. For a moment, I almost respected her consistency. She truly believed her crusade was noble. But then she glanced at me, eyes gleaming with personal satisfaction, and I knew it wasn't about order. It was about ego. About erasing the humiliation of yesterday. I stood. You want fines? Fine. Let's take a vote. The board members, a handful of retirees, a middle-aged couple, and one nervous college student who had clearly been bullied into the position, exchanged uncertain looks. Karen glared at them like a general demanding obedience. Slowly, hands raised. 2 in her favor. 1 against. 1 abstaining. The tiebreaker rested on the college student, who looked like he'd rather crawl under the table than pick a side. Before he could decide, Marcus spoke again. If you do this, you're setting a precedent that could come back to bite you. Every birthday party, every cookout, every pool splash becomes a finable offense. Is that really the kind of neighborhood you want? The student swallowed hard and shook his head. No. I vote no. Karen slammed the gavel again, but this time the hollow plastic clack had no authority. Then we will revisit this at the next meeting, she snapped. The room broke into chatter. Parents gathered in small knots, venting frustration. Karen stormed out, muttering about appeals and higher authorities. Marcus gave me a wry grin as he followed the crowd out. But I knew it wasn't finished. Humiliation had burned her once. Rejection had burned her twice. Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly. She was going to escalate, and whatever came next wouldn't be about rules on paper. It would be personal. That night, long after the meeting ended, I stood by my window watching her house. The lights flickered on and off as she moved from room to room, pacing, plotting. The curtains snapped shut, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The first sign that Karen had escalated her campaign didn't arrive in the form of another notice on my door or a shrill voicemail on my answering machine. It arrived in the form of a clipboard. To the untrained eye, it was just an ordinary clipboard, cheap plastic, scratched corners, a few papers attached with a rusted clip. But in our neighborhood, a clipboard in Karen's hand was the symbol of impending trouble. She wielded it like a sheriff's badge, and when I saw her pacing the sidewalks with it the next morning, jotting things down while glaring at every lawn and driveway, I knew she had shifted gears. By lunchtime, 3 of my neighbors had already texted me. Karen had cited them for related infractions connected to the balloon fight, wet footprints on sidewalks, evidence of water damage on stucco, and, in one particularly imaginative case, potential mosquito breeding grounds in a child's sandbox. She wasn't just coming after me anymore. She was spreading the battlefield, making it clear that anyone who aligned with me would pay a price. Divide and conquer, classic HOA warfare. My wife was furious. She's dragging everyone into this. It's harassment. Of course it's harassment, I said, pouring another cup of coffee. But it's also strategy. She wants the neighbors to pressure us into backing down. And for a while it seemed to work. A couple of families quietly withdrew from the balloon games. One dad pulled me aside and muttered something about not wanting to risk fines. Another mother stopped answering my wife's texts about organizing a weekend barbecue. The neighborhood had grown colder overnight, not because people disliked us, but because Karen had reminded them how much power she could wield with her pen and her clipboard. But she had underestimated how deep her humiliation still burned, because that afternoon she committed her boldest move yet. She called the county health department. I learned about it when a white county vehicle pulled into our cul-de-sac, hazard lights flashing. Out stepped a man in khaki pants and a polo shirt with a county logo embroidered on the chest. He looked vaguely annoyed, the way someone looks when their lunch break has been interrupted. He carried a laminated badge clipped to his belt and a packet of forms under his arm. He knocked on my door with 3 polite raps. "Mr. Parker?" he asked when I opened it. "That's me," I said cautiously. "I'm from the county health department. We received a complaint regarding unsafe water practices on your property." I almost laughed. "Unsafe water practices?" He nodded, flipping through his forms. "Allegations of standing water, mosquito breeding, potential biohazard due to children's activities." Biohazard. I echoed, incredulous. They were throwing balloons filled with tap water. The man sighed. Look, I'll be honest. We get these calls sometimes. Most of them are nothing. I just need to take a look around, make sure there's nothing standing in buckets or open containers. Then I can close the complaint. I led him around the yard. He peeked at the hose, the grass, the flower bed. He scribbled a note on his form, then looked at me with a weary smile. Nothing here. Complaint unfounded. Do I need to ask who filed it? I said dryly. He chuckled. Lady across the street? The one pacing with the clipboard? She's filed 6 complaints this month. 2 about lawns, 1 about a barbecue grill, and now this. You're not her first target. I thanked him as he left, but inside, the frustration simmered. This wasn't about rules anymore. Karen was abusing every channel she could find to make my life miserable. If the health department had been her first attempt, what was next? The fire marshal? Animal control? The IRS? By evening, the tension in the cul-de-sac was palpable. Parents huddled in whispered conversations. Kids were quieter than usual, glancing nervously toward Karen's house. And then, as if scripted, Karen made her grand entrance. She stepped onto her porch with the clipboard in one hand and a bullhorn in the other. Yes, a bullhorn. Attention residents of Willow Creek, she bellowed, her voice amplified across the neighborhood. Curtains twitched. Doors opened. People stepped out onto porches to watch. It has come to my attention that certain individuals in this community believe they are above the rules, that they can endanger others with reckless disregard, that they can humiliate authority figures without consequence. I stood on my lawn, arms crossed, watching her. The kids gathered behind me, their faces pale with confusion. But I am here to tell you, Karen continued, that order will be restored. Tomorrow morning, the board will convene again, and if we must impose special assessments, we will. Those who think they can mock the rules will soon learn otherwise. Her voice cracked on the last line, but she quickly lowered the bullhorn and swept back inside like a victorious general. For a long moment, the neighborhood was silent. Then one of the kids whispered, "She's crazy." But I knew better. She wasn't crazy. She was desperate. Every failed attempt to assert control only pushed her to escalate further. That night, Marcus came by. He leaned against my porch railing, beer in hand, and said, "She called the health department on you?" "Yep." "And gave a speech with a bullhorn?" "Yep." He shook his head, laughing softly. "She's playing a dangerous game. Abusing emergency services is one thing, but false reports to county offices? If she keeps this up, she'll land herself in real trouble." "Maybe that's what we need," I said. "For her to cross the lines so badly there's no going back." Marcus looked at me steadily. "Be careful what you wish for. When someone like her feels cornered, that's when they do the most damage." The next morning, I understood exactly what he meant. I woke to the sound of engines rumbling and saw 3 HOA trucks parked along the curb. Workers in reflective vests were unloading cones and barricade. Karen stood proudly on her porch, clipboard in hand, directing them like a foreman. By the time I got outside, they were setting up barricades across my driveway. A laminated sign read, "Property quarantined, unsafe conditions." Karen spotted me and smiled thinly. "Good morning, Mr. Parker. By authority of the HOA, your property has been quarantined until further notice. No vehicles in or out. No gatherings permitted. This is for the safety of the community." "You can't be serious," I said. "Oh, I am," she replied sweetly. "We'll review the matter at the next meeting. Until then, compliance is mandatory." Behind me, my kids were staring in disbelief. My wife's jaw clenched. Neighbors were gathering again, some whispering, some outright laughing at the absurdity. But Karen wasn't laughing. She stood with the smug certainty of someone who believed she had finally seized the upper hand. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply pulled out my phone, snapped several photos, and sent them to Marcus. A minute later, my phone buzzed with his reply, "Stay put. I'm on my way." As the HOA workers hammered the last barricade into place, Karen turned to her audience of neighbors with a satisfied smirk. She thought she had won. But the truth was, she had just written her own downfall in big, bold letters. And when Marcus arrived, this time not in shorts and a polo but in full uniform, with his badge gleaming and authority unmistakable, Karen finally realized she had escalated one step too far. Marcus's cruiser slid into the cul-de-sac with the kind of presence that made everyone go still. The laughter, the whispers, even the faint hum of the HOA workers' drills fell silent as the chief of police himself stepped out in full uniform. The contrast from the balloon fight 2 days earlier was striking. No flip-flops, no board shorts, no casual grin. This was Marcus in official mode, and every detail of his bearing said one thing: business. Karen's smugness faltered for the first time. She lowered her clipboard a fraction, suddenly aware that the barricades in my driveway looked less like community order and more like hostile occupation. Still, she drew herself up, pearls gleaming at her throat, and called out, "Chief Hayes. So glad you could come. Perhaps you can help enforce our safety protocols." Marcus didn't answer right away. He walked slowly toward the barricades, examined the laminated quarantine sign, then turned to the workers. "Who authorized this?" The workers hesitated. One muttered, "We were told to set it up." "HOA President's orders." Karen nodded crisply. "That would be me. President Karen L. Rothschild of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. And yes, I authorized this quarantine. These premises are unsafe." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Unsafe how?" Karen hesitated just a hair too long. "Standing water. Health violations. Endangerment of children. As HOA president, I am empowered to take emergency measures." Marcus crossed his arms, his badge catching the morning sun. "You are not empowered to block a family's private driveway with barricade. You're not empowered to declare quarantines. That authority belongs to the county and the health department, not the HOA. You're trespassing, and you're interfering with the rights of this homeowner." Gasps rippled through the crowd of neighbors. Karen's mouth opened, but Marcus pressed on before she could recover. "And let's not forget," he continued, voice calm but sharp, "this is the third time in 48 hours you've abused official channels. First 9/11, then a false health department complaint, now this stunt. That's a pattern." Karen clutched her clipboard like a shield. "I have a duty to this community. If others are too weak to enforce the rules, then I must." "Duty doesn't mean harassment," Marcus said flatly. "And it doesn't mean inventing authority you don't have. You're walking a fine line between nuisance and criminal conduct." For the first time, Karen's confidence cracked. She looked around at the neighbors, perhaps expecting their support, but found only uneasy silence. Even her usual allies, those who had voted with her at the board meeting, were shrinking back, unwilling to be seen standing with her now that the chief was calling her out. I stepped forward then, not gloating, just steady. "Karen, you've made your point. But it's over. Take down the barricades." She whipped her head toward me, eyes blazing. "You don't get to tell me when it's over. I decide when it's over." Marcus's voice cut through hers like steel. "No, ma'am. You don't." The workers shifted uncomfortably, then began dismantling the barricades without waiting for further orders. Karen shrieked at them to stop, but no one listened. The hollow clang of metal being dragged away was the sound of her power crumbling in real time. "Consider this a warning," Marcus said as the last cone was loaded back into the truck. "If you try another stunt like this, you won't just be facing an HOA dispute. You'll be facing charges. Do you understand me?" Karen's face had gone a dangerous shade of red, but she nodded stiffly, words caught in her throat. The workers drove off. The neighbors dispersed in small groups, whispering furiously, phones already out to text friends and spouses about what they'd just witnessed. My kids exhaled in relief. My wife squeezed my arm. For the first time in days, the air felt lighter. But Karen wasn't finished. She couldn't be. That evening, as the sun set, she made her last desperate move. The HOA board's email list lit up with a furious message from her, a formal resolution to remove me from the neighborhood entirely. She cited habitual disruption, failure to comply with directives, and creating unsafe conditions for minors. It was laughable, but it was also official, and it meant she was still willing to swing her clipboard until the bitter end. The emails spread like wildfire. By the time I opened mine, my phone was buzzing with texts from neighbors. Most of them mocked her. A few expressed genuine worry. Could she really do it? Could she force me out? Marcus came by again, this time not as chief, but as a friend. He leaned on the porch railing, sipping the iced tea my wife handed him, and said, "She's doubling down because she knows she's lost. People like her can't accept humiliation. They need to rewrite it as victory." "So what's her next move?" I asked. "She'll call a vote," Marcus said. "But you're safe. Even her allies are done with this. She overplayed her hand with the barricade. They saw how far she'll go, and they don't want to be dragged down with her." And he was right. At the emergency vote 2 days later, the clubhouse was packed. Karen marched in with her clipboard and a folder of papers, chin high, eyes blazing. She laid out her case in a 20-minute tirade that circled every buzzword she knew: safety, property values, community standards, but never once addressed the truth. When she finished, she demanded a vote of removal. The ballots were passed out. The neighbors scribbled quickly. And when the results were tallied, the outcome was devastating for her. Not a single vote in her favor. Even her closest allies had abandoned her. For a long moment, she stood frozen at the front of the room, staring at the sea of hands that had just condemned her. Then, without a word, she slammed the clipboard onto the table, grabbed her folder, and stormed out. The door banged shut behind her. The HOA secretary cleared his throat. Motion fails unanimously. Meeting adjourned. The room erupted in chatter. Neighbors clapped me on the back, laughing, relieved. The kids cheered when they heard the news later, already planning the next balloon battle. My wife smiled for the first time in days, tension finally easing from her shoulders. As for Karen, her house went dark that night. Curtains drawn, porch light off. For weeks afterward, she kept to herself. No more notices taped to doors. No more pacing with a clipboard. No more bullhorn speeches. The silence was almost unsettling. But the neighborhood thrived. Without her constant interference, people relaxed. Barbecues popped up again. Kids played freely. The air felt lighter, freer. Even the board meetings became less tense, focused on actual maintenance rather than vendettas. One evening, as I sat on my porch with Marcus, sipping a beer, he said, "Funny how one person can hold an entire place hostage with nothing but paper and a loud voice." Funny, I agreed. But even louder than her voice is the sound of everyone finally laughing at her. And that, in the end, was the real victory. Not fines, not rules, not barricades or vote. Just the simple, undeniable truth that the neighborhood had chosen joy over fear.